Welcome to this Faith and Legacy Forum. This is our second talk on this. We are honored to have Dr. Associate Professor Dr. Nasha from USM. Just before we start this, I pass to the moderator. I would like just announce the group, the house rule. Please silence your phone or mute your phone. Okay, if you want to use the washroom, you can go up and turn right, and that's in the middle of the two lecture hall. That's the washroom. Okay. Okay, I would like now to pass the time to the moderator today, Dr. Anu. Is a senior lecturer of Indian Study, Department of Indian Study. Yeah, Dr. Anu.
Hello everyone, and good morning to all of you. We are yet to see more crowds because the registrations were quite full. But anyway, we will just start on time. Right, a very good morning to all of you. Firstly, to Venerable, who is actually our director for the Fogan Humanistic Buddhism. Thank you for having this faith and this session with us. And we also like to thank Associate Professor Nasha Khaw for coming here to actually deliver his findings and his talk for today. Now, as the topic, what is ancient Kedah as a trade hub all about? So we may have something that we have already learned, or probably would like to unlearn certain things. So without ado, I would just like to introduce this topic a little bit. The topic explores how the region of ancient Kedah, often associated with Bujang Valley, became an important center for international trade centuries before the rise of our famous regional ports such as Malacca. Cultural exchange trade brought not only goods but also ideas. Influences reached Kedah through merchants and travelers. So this is what we're going to explore today. Now let me introduce the speaker for today. Just excuse me. A little bit humble introduction to our speaker today. Our speaker is Associate Professor Nasha Khaw. Nasha Rodziadi Khaw is a senior lecturer in the Center of Global Archaeological Research, University Science Malaysia. He received his master's degree in archaeology from USM and his PhD from University of Peshawar, which is in Pakistan. He specializes in historical archaeology, epigraphic, and his research interest covers the history of archaeology of early Malay kingdoms, as well as the epigraphy of Malay archipelago. His research interests archaeology of ancient Kedah, epigraphic studies in Malay archaeology, history and archaeology of early Malay kingdoms. Without further ado, let me invite Associate Professor to take his stand. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to congratulate the Humanistic Buddhist Center for hosting this event. And thank you to all of you for being here. And I can see lots of familiar faces here. So thank you for being consistently interested in the history of ancient Kedah and in our research in the Bujang Valley. The Center for Global Archaeological Research has been conducting excavations, archaeological campaign in the Bujang Valley since the year 2008. Our research initially focused only in the Sungai Batu archaeological complex, And then after the year 2016, we began expanding into other parts of the Puncak Valley, which is the Bukit Coras area as well as in other sites. However, for my particular research, I use a different framework of interpreting these coastal polities. We see that since the 1980s, we have a new development of understanding regarding the coastal polities of Southeast Asia and Maritime area. You know, the research by Anthony Miller, by Anthony Reid, by Kenneth Khaw, by Andaya, by John Lindsay. These people, they no longer view the coastal polities as a centralized kingdom, but constellation of coastal and riverine settlement bound together through a system of loyalties. So it was not really a centralized kingdom. And under this framework, I try to interpret Kedah by using their framework. Okay? And this is how we started to get a more clear view regarding the cultural dynamic and the political system of the societies in Kedah. The purpose we do excavation in the Puncak Valley is not just to expose temples or to look for beautiful artifacts, but to answer specific research objectives. You know, we wanted to understand the chronology of ancient Kedah, from what period it emerged, what period it started to decline. We want to understand about the cultural interconnectivity of this area, and we can only know it by looking at the temples or looking at the artifacts. We want to understand regarding the pattern of settlement. We want to understand about the partial environment. So there are so many research objectives that we needed to answer. And based on these objectives, then we conduct excavations. So there is this some misconception that we did to look for artifacts. No, we did to answer specific research questions, and we calibrate our research based on the research objectives. Okay, next. Now, most people would view ancient Kedah, you know, especially in the public sphere, public narrative, they would view ancient Kedah as one centralized Hindu or Buddhist kingdom. But that is not actually the case. You know, for most maritime polities, they are not really a centralized kingdom with one king, you know, exercising control over the population. That is not the case. Based on our research, it shows that ancient Kedah was a constellation of coastal and riverine settlements. They have their own economic center, and within the economic center, there were several settlements with specific economic functions. And outside the economic center, there were several more coastal settlements bound to the economic center based on this very flexible and pragmatic loyalty. You know, but the most important thing is that we know that each settlement, they were quite autonomous, and they had their own form of relation with the outside world. So we should no longer view ancient Kedah as a kingdom, but we should see them as a collection or network of coastal polities with specific economic function, with specific cultural identity, and within the settlements there were different communities coming from different backgrounds. You know, we should view ancient Kedah as a place where different cultures will be practiced at the same time, and that is very normal for any coastal settlement located in the middle of the trade route. You know, we can see that many of these settlements, they were coastal outposts with Indian temples, with you know, we have influence of Japanese artifacts, we have Chinese ceramics, we have Arabian glasses, you know, we have iron ceramic sites showing Indian influence, we have indigenous population, everything mixed together in one complex. So the culture of ancient Kedah is extremely complex, the political system is extremely fluid, the form of relation with the outside world is extremely pragmatic. And these are the research questions that we want to answer to map out the complexity of culture, polity, and society in ancient Kedah. And that is the reason why we are toiling away in our joint research to look for data to answer these research questions. Okay, next. So I have just been given 1 hour, or maybe a little bit more than 1 hour, to talk about ancient Kedah. So I will be dividing my presentation into 5 parts. Number 1, I am going to explain what is the events which lead to the emergence of ancient Kedah. So ancient Kedah did not just suddenly appear. The appearance of ancient Kedah was due to sequence of events, sequence of geopolitical events that leads to its development. Okay? So how did ancient Kedah happen? How it emerged as a center for trade? Number two, we have to go through all the historical records of formation Kedah. Okay? Most of the historical records that we have consisted of Indian and Arab records. We have a single Chinese record from I Ching and the Malay literary account, which is going to be a total separate chapter. I did a special lecture for that. So we are going to focus on the Indian and Arab records. Thirdly, we are going to focus on the archaeological findings and the distribution of archaeological sites. Number four, we are going to look at the most recent excavation by University Science Malaysia. And what I mean by recent, from 2023 until now, okay, just like 1 month ago, we just came back from our archaeological excavation. Okay? And finally, the most important thing, we are going to answer the question of, so what? We have these findings, we have this excavation, what does it tell about our history, and to what extent that the lessons about the ancient Kedah can help our nation building, can help about building our national identity. So I'll be covering these 5 topics. Okay, next. Now, okay, so we know that the region of Maritime Southeast Asia was connected, was incorporated into the network of long distance trade from the period of 4th to 3rd century BC. And that actually happened due to the centralization of India under the rule of the Mauryas. Okay, we know that Chandragupta Maurya and after that Ashoka made it to centralize the different municipalities of India into one rule. And when you centralize the rule, you have political stability. With political stability, you have economic progress, and with economic progress, what you have industrialization, and you have excess of commodity, you have surplus of commodity. And that leads to the necessity to trade that commodity. During that very same period, we saw also the intensification of trade between the Mediterranean with the South Asia. We know that there was some relation between the Romans in the Mediterranean world with South Asia based on the archaeological findings that we have. So this development, this geopolitical development had opened the trade route towards the east of India, opening them for the traders. And that is why we see by the 4th to the 3rd century BC, we discovered artifacts located on the northern part of the Thai-Malay Peninsula. Next. So during this period, between the 4th to the 3rd century BC, excavations at several archaeological sites located near to the Khaw Isthmus had led to the discovery of 4 types of artifacts. Number 1, we discovered artifacts coming from the late prehistoric period of Southeast Asia, such as the Dobson artifact, the Sakyu colony artifact, and the late Neolithic period artifacts. It had shown that even before the arrival of the foreign traders, the local community had already traded among themselves within the region. Many people from the Indochina and the Thai-Malay Peninsula, they were already interacted, and they already knew how to sail across the South China Sea based on these artifacts that we have. Okay? And then somewhere in the 3rd century BC, we discovered artifacts coming from the Maurya period, and then this proven based on the ceilings that we discovered over here. Those are written in the Maurya script Brahmi. Okay, the Maurya Brahmi dated back from the 4th century BC, and we also discovered some stone carvings coming from India, also 4th, 3rd century BC. So this implied that by the 4th, 3rd century BC, the Indian traders were already there, and they traveled across the Bay of Bengal into the Khaw Isthmus, which is located quite near from India, just across the sea. And during the same period, we also discovered Roman coins dated back from the 2nd or 1st century BC. That does not necessarily mean that the Romans arrived in Southeast Asia, but maybe it was brought by Indian traders, but still the objects already traveled. And starting from the 2nd to the 1st century BC, we saw artifacts coming from the Han Dynasty. Okay? So we can see how the geopolitical development led to the emergence of these coastal communities as the place where they exchange their goods. And during the first period, most of the activities happen somewhere in the Khaw Isthmus, and they don't really travel into the Strait of Malacca just yet during that time. Okay? Next. So during this time, the Indians who had actually had some great relations with Southeast Asia, included the Mauritians, and then followed by the Shugas, the Satavahanas, etc. So these were the people who exchanged their goods. And we can see that the early establishment of this connectivity led to the formation of polities at the fringes of Southeast Asia, mostly near to the ground east-west. And during this very period, most of the artifacts, they consisted of ornaments, very small artifacts, gold ornaments, beads, stone carvings, gold intaglios, those very small things which you can easily carry, and they don't need big vessels for it. Okay, next. However, somewhere in the 2nd to 3rd century AD, we saw a big development happening during that time. Number one, it was a period of instability in China. Okay, after the fall of the Han Dynasty, there were some political problems in China, and China was divided during that time. But during this very same period, we saw the consolidation of the kingdom in India, which led to the emergence of the re-emergence of industry in India. And during this time, we can see that the economic center started to shift from the north, in the Khaw Isthmus, toward the south. Okay, and during this very same period, we saw the emergence of Asia. Okay, so why does the economic center shifted from north to south? Next. So during this time, we saw the decline of the sites located in the north of the Khaw Isthmus, such as Khaw, Phuket, and we saw the emergence of new exchange sites towards the south, like Chaya, Nahor Sitamaran, and Apapa. And this period also saw the emergence of ancient Kedah. Okay? And what is the characteristic of this period? In the previous period, most of the artifacts, most of the commodities, they revolved around small ornaments. But during this time, they started to focus on bigger part of artifacts, like heavy artifacts like iron objects, pottery, ceramics, and beads. Okay, and those things need to be exported in big amount, and then you need to use bigger vessels. Next. This shift had a lot to do with the sailing technology that developed during that time. Before the 2nd or 3rd century AD, they used the coast hugging method to sail. Okay, the coast hugging method is that they just travel near to the coast, and by using this method, what they do, they travel along the coast of East India into Myanmar, and then until the coast of the northern part of the Malay Peninsula, and then they are to cross overland through the Khaw Isthmus into the South China Sea and straight to China. So this is during the first period. However, during the second period, we saw the development of a new sailing method. We call it the direct sailing method. Okay, they were able to control the monsoons already, so they don't have to use the coast hugging method. So they could just travel across the Bay of Bengal. And by using this method, they don't need to use the Khaw Isthmus anymore. Straight from the east coast of India into the Strait of Malacca. And that is exactly when we saw the development of ancient Kedah as a property. So the emergence of ancient Kedah has a lot to do with the shift of geopolitics. With the centralization of power under the Gupta dynasty, the changing of sailing method, from coast hugging to direct sailing method, and at the same time we saw also the disintegration of the Han dynasty, where most of the trade focused around India during that time. And during the very same period, we saw the emergence of multiple polities in Southeast Asia. It's not just in Asia, but also in other places. We saw the rise of Kedah, we saw the rise of Funan, we saw the rise of several polities in Borneo and West Java, and also in Eastern Sumatra. So the emergence of Asia Kedah is not an isolated event. It's just the combination of several geopolitical events started from the 4th century BC, and the culmination led to the emergence of Asia Kedah in the 2nd or 3rd century AD. And finally, Asia Kedah was mentioned for the first time in historical record in the Tabiat of the Sangha period, Patinapalai, where they say that the goods of Kedah was traded in a port of Kaveri Patina. Okay, so it was the first time, mentioned of Kedah in 2nd century AD. So it's consistent with the evidence that we have here. Okay, next. What do we know about Asia Kedah? Now, before we get do the archaeological finding, we need to go through the historical records first. Okay? Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there are lots of historical records mentioning about the ship. But the most important ones are the Arab records and the Indian records. Okay. However, we need to be very careful with the foreign records because they were copied down many times and they were written from different perspectives. The field of archaeology for ancient Kedah, we call it historical archaeology. And the definition of historical archaeology is the study of human activities based on archaeological remains contextualized by historical records. So the point of departure for our argument is archaeology, and we use history to support our argument, not the other way around. Okay, that is our method. You know, for other historians, maybe you guys have a different method, but for archaeology, for my method is that we use archaeology as a point of departure. So in a nutshell, the first stop method, you know, until we find the artifact that we don't really make the insertion. Okay, and then the archaeology, the historical records help us to interpret. That's it. Okay, next. So, most of the records, they consisted of writers coming from the West actually. And this is consistent with the archaeological findings that we have in the Puncak Valley. We have lots of Indian temples and we have lots of Arab structures. So it appears that the emergence of ancient Kedah was pretty much to cater for the need of the Western traders, the Western, I mean Indian and Middle Eastern traders. At the same time, we do discover lots of structures. But when it comes to historical records, next. There are 4 groups of Indian records that we have regarding ancient Kedah. Number 1, we have the Khaw literature. Number 1 is Patinapalai, which can be dated somewhere between the 2nd to the 4th century CE. Of course, the scholars are still debating about this. And then we have Silang Adikram, dating back from the 5th to the 6th century. And then we have the Karukatai, which can be dated around the 9th to 10th century CE. But still, they are important. It shows that ancient Kedah has always been part of the Indian, the Tamil psyche, you know, when they wrote the literature. And the second group of historical records, we call them the Chora inscriptions, that can be dated from the 9th from the 10th to 11th century CE. They are also very important because they provide some insights regarding the political history of the region. But then we have to be very careful with the Chora records because those are the government records and it could be seen as a state propaganda. It could be seen as a state propaganda. So, are the things which have been asserted in the record, we do not reject it, but we need to deal with caution. We need to cross-check with external accounts also. So whatever mentioned in the Chora record is not yet historical certainty. Okay? Because in archaeology, like what I said, we need the evidence on the ground first and then confirm by historical records. We are going to discuss about this later. Okay? And then we have the Sanskrit texts. And the Sanskrit text, we have firstly the religious records. And the religious records we have from all religions actually. We have the Buddhist records. You know, we have the Astashrika Prajnaparamita Sutra, the Buddhist record. We have the Suparajataka, those are 2 Buddhists. And we have the Hindu record of Garuda Purana and Vamana Purana. And they also have the Kuchika Tantra, the Tantric record. So all Indian religions are mentioned by the Kedah. And also we have the Sanskrit Prakrit literature text of the Kata Saripala, the Kampuni Mahosila, the Brihat Katamanjari, Jana Kirana, and Savaran Chakaha. So there are lots of Indian records mentioning about Kedah. And there are still, I think there's a few more that I didn't notice now. There are still more. Okay, next. So let's go one by one. I hope that we have enough time. Huh? So the first one is Patinapalai. They mentioned that the goods of Khaw was available in the port of Kaveri Patinam. Just that one sentence only. Okay, and we can relate Khaw with Kedah. Okay? And number 2, we have Silang Adikram, 5th to 6th century CE. And they say that a variety of agar wood in Madurai is known as Kedaravan. Okay, Kedaravan, you know, in the 14th century commentary of this record, they relate Kedaravan with Kedara, which is Kedah also. And number 3, we have in Arukata, it was stated that the Katartu Yirumbu was used to build a chariot, you know, 10, 11, 9 to 10th century. But the most important thing is that the people in Tamil, they knew, that is the main point. Second, next. we have the Chola inscriptions. Okay, so some inscriptions mention Maravijaya Tunggavarman as the king of Sriwijaya who is conducting the rule of Kedah. So in Sanskrit they say that Sriwijaya Adipatina Kataha Adipatyam Adavanta means the king of Sriwijaya conducting the rule in Kedah. And then the king of Sriwijaya was often mentioned as the king of Kedah. So this raises some questions regarding whether or not Kedah was one of the many capitals of Sriwijaya. Now, I'm not saying that it is the only capital, but it is one of the many capitals. Because Kedah was very important to the Cholas. So they mentioned the king of Sriwijaya as the king of Kedah. So this is also a very important thing. And we have the Nagapatina inscription. It is said that the representative of the king of Sriwijaya donated to her Mahadeva temple, in India. So although the Kedah, the Sriwijaya rulers were known to be Buddhist, but they donated to the Hindu temple. So this maybe due to political reasons also. And this also mentioned that the king of Kadaram gave donation also to Nagaiya Nagara temple also. So you can see that the Buddhist leaders they could donate to Hindu temples, maybe in a way for them to carry favors with the Chola kings. Maybe next. So we have several more inscriptions. For instance, we have the Tirukadayu inscription issued by Rajendra Chola in the year 1027. About the attack from Kedah. That is the issue right now. Yes, it mentioned about the attack, and then I have to say that the Chola inscription is a government inscription issued to aggrandize the king Chola. We do not reject that thing. I say that maybe the attack happens, but it's not yet a historical certainty. Because we have not yet found any external account mentioning about the attack. I say that maybe some conflict happened, but is it to the scale as has been mentioned inside the report? Because when we did our excavation in the Rodziadi, we have not yet found a single piece of Chola coin yet. Until today, the best known site of 11th century CE is Mekalamujang. And people have been excavating Mekalamujang since the 1970s, by the Saudi, not a single piece. We went to Kampung Sungai Mas, also not a single piece of Chola coin. So, whether or not the attack happened is still a debate. And also, if the attack happened, then we need to explain how they transported all the troops all the way from India to Kedah. Okay, what was their stopping point, how they were able to mobilize these kind of troops. Okay, so there are so many questions answered, so we need to still discuss about that. And also we have a ruler inscription by Veera Rajendra who said that the ruler of Chola helped Kedah to quell the rebellion. So I say that most of the time the relation between Kedah and Chola was very good, and maybe there were one or two conflicts, process. Okay, next. And also we have the smaller lighter photography method right to 1090 CE, mentioning that the king Ulutuga Chola renewed the time. The first issue when Raja first, so it shows the continuation of good relation between the Cholas and the next. Okay, and then we have several Sanskrit literary texts. We have Kata Sari Sakara repeatedly mentioned that Kedah was an important port, it was a rich port, but then it was a fictional thing, so we shouldn't take it and face with him. And then we have Kamudi Mahut Sabah, and it's actually a comedy, so they also mentioned about Kedah in this type of text. Okay, next. And then we have Brihat Kata Majari. Okay, the thing about Brihat Kata Majari, they have not yet been translated to English, so we have to do the translation ourselves. So we say, they mentioned about Kedah that it is located towards the edge of the horizon, and they went there to trade a abundant number of goods. So it was mentioned that Kedah was an important port. Okay, next. And another one is by Chanakirana, dated back to the 6th, 7th century CE. This one also we have to do the translation ourselves. And they say that King Dasaratha passed across the ocean and caused the king of Kedah to conspire. Pablo dia takut. So it is also another literary text. Next. And then we have the Samaracha Kaha. Okay, next. Okay, so these are the translation that we did. Okay, about what they mentioned about Kedah. So some they mentioned Kedah as an island. Okay, well now I'm going to tell you why they call it like that. So they call Kedah as Maha Kataha. And then they say that, they go to Kedah to gain wealth. And also they mention about the resident of Maha Kataha. And then they say that they went to Maha Kataha using the ship